March 2013. The morning frost clung to the Gothic windows of St. Ignatius High School as Cleveland Police Detective Maria Santos pulled her unmarked sedan into the faculty parking lot at precisely 7:23 a.m. 6 patrol cars had already surrounded the brick building, their red and blue lights cutting through the dawn mist like ghosts from another era. Principal Father Michael Rodriguez was unlocking his office door when Detective Santos approached, with a warrant that would shatter 5 decades of carefully constructed lies. What began as a routine DNA match in the state database had transformed into the most shocking confession in Cleveland's criminal history. A beloved teacher admitting to the brutal murder of 17-year-old Margaret Elizabeth O'Connor exactly 50 years prior. If you're fascinated by cold cases that reveal dark secrets hiding in plain sight, smash that like button and subscribe for exclusive details that mainstream coverage leaves out. Margaret Elizabeth O'Connor entered this world on September 12, 1947, in Cleveland's Irish Catholic neighborhood of Cam's Corners. Standing 5 feet 4 inches tall with auburn hair that caught sunlight like copper wire, she possessed striking green eyes that her mother often said could see straight into people's souls. Her father, Thomas Patrick O'Connor, worked as a supervisor at Republic Steel, while her mother, Catherine Marie O'Connor, managed their modest household and raised Margaret alongside her 2 younger brothers, Kevin, age 14, and Daniel, age 11. Maggie had this laugh that could fill up our entire house, her brother Kevin would later recall decades after her death. She was always bringing home stray cats or helping elderly neighbors with their groceries. She just couldn't stand to see anyone or anything suffering. Margaret dreamed of becoming a social worker, inspired by her volunteer work at St. Vincent de Paul Society, where she distributed food to struggling families every Saturday morning. Her English teacher, Sister Catherine Francis, remembered her as intellectually curious and morally grounded, exactly the type of young woman who would change the world for the better. During the autumn of 1965, Margaret maintained a rigorous schedule that included honor roll classes, choir practice on Tuesday evenings, babysitting for the Morrison family on Fridays, and her beloved Saturday volunteer work. The O'Connor family represented the backbone of Cleveland's working-class Catholic community, hard-working, devout, and completely unprepared for the nightmare that would soon consume their lives. Cleveland in 1965 existed as a bustling industrial metropolis of nearly 1 million residents, where steel mills painted the sky orange at sunset and the Cuyahoga River carried the dreams and debris of American manufacturing. The Cam's Corners neighborhood where Margaret lived embodied the era's optimism, tree-lined streets filled with modest homes owned by families who believed hard work guaranteed prosperity and safety. St. Bartholomew Catholic Church anchored the community's spiritual life, while Cam's Plaza provided shopping and socializing opportunities for residents who often lived their entire lives within a 5-mile radius. The civil rights movement was reshaping America, but neighborhoods like Cam's Corners remained insulated cocoons where parents felt comfortable allowing their teenagers to walk alone after dark. Local police knew families by name, and the concept of random violence seemed as foreign as life on Mars, a naivety that would prove tragically fatal on November 23, 1965. November 23, 1965 began as an ordinary Tuesday in the O'Connor household. 6:30 a.m. Margaret descended the stairs wearing her St. Bartholomew High School uniform, navy blue skirt, white blouse, and the small silver cross necklace her grandmother had given her for confirmation. 7:15 a.m. She shared breakfast with her family, discussing plans for Thanksgiving dinner just 2 days away, while her mother packed her brown bag lunch. 8 a.m. Margaret walked to school with her best friend Susan Riley, stopping to pet Mrs. Henderson's golden retriever as they did every morning. 11:45 a.m. During lunch period, she finalized arrangements to babysit for the Morrison children that evening. 3:20 p.m. School dismissed, and Margaret stayed behind for 30 minutes to practice Christmas carols with the choir, her clear soprano voice echoing through the empty hallways. 4:15 p.m. She began her walk to the Morrison house on West 130th Street, her book bag slung over her shoulder and choir music tucked safely inside. 4:35 p.m. Mrs. Eleanor Morrison answered her door and welcomed Margaret inside, noting how excited she seemed about the upcoming holiday. 8:30 p.m. Margaret helped put 3-year-old Tommy Morrison to bed, reading him Goodnight Moon twice as she did every Friday evening. 9:45 p.m. The Morrisons returned home from dinner and a movie, paying Margaret her usual babysitting fee of $3. 10:15 p.m. Margaret stepped out into the November darkness, declining Mr. Morrison's offer to drive her home because it's only 4 blocks and I could use the fresh air. Those would be the last words Margaret Elizabeth O'Connor would ever speak to someone who lived to remember them. The discovery came at dawn on November 24, 1965, when St. Bartholomew's groundskeeper Joseph Kowalski arrived early to prepare the church grounds for Thanksgiving services. Hidden behind the rectory's garden shed, partially concealed by fallen autumn leaves, lay Margaret's lifeless body. Kowalski's screams brought Father Patrick Murphy running, and the priest's immediate call to police launched an investigation that would consume Cleveland law enforcement for months. Detective Raymond Walsh, a 20-year veteran who had seen his share of violence, later described the scene as methodical and cold. Whoever did this took their time and showed no mercy. Evidence recovered included Margaret's torn school uniform, scattered several feet from her body, her book bag, contents strewn across the frozen ground, 3 buttons from her white blouse, suggesting a violent struggle, a single black leather glove found near the garden shed, too large to belong to Margaret, strange tire tracks in the soft earth behind the rectory, indicating a vehicle had been parked there recently, and most chillingly, a handwritten note tucked inside her choir music that read she knew too much. The Cams Corners community reacted with unprecedented shock and fear. Parents began driving their children everywhere, neighbors installed new locks, and attendance at evening church services dropped dramatically as residents grappled with the reality that evil had invaded their sanctuary. Have you ever felt completely safe in your neighborhood, only to have that security shattered by unexpected violence? Cleveland police in 1965 operated with limited forensic capabilities compared to modern standards, relying primarily on witness testimony, fingerprint analysis, and basic ballistics testing. The investigation team, led by Detective Walsh and his partner Detective Anthony Russo, immediately focused on several suspects whose connections to Margaret seemed suspicious. Thomas Mitchell Hampton, age 34, worked as a maintenance supervisor at St. Bartholomew High School and had access to all areas of the building and grounds. Margaret had complained to friends about his inappropriate comments regarding her appearance, and several students reported seeing him watching the girls during choir practice. However, Hampton provided a solid alibi. He had been working a double shift at Republic Steel on November 23rd, with time cards and witness statements confirming his presence until midnight. Robert James Sullivan, age 22, delivered newspapers in the Cams Corners area and had been seen talking to Margaret on several occasions. His criminal record included arrests for petty theft and public intoxication, making him an obvious person of interest. Sullivan claimed he had been drinking at Murphy's Tavern on the night of November 23rd, but the bartender couldn't definitively confirm his presence during the critical hours. Investigators ultimately eliminated him when 3 reliable witnesses placed him at his girlfriend's apartment during the estimated time of Margaret's death. David Michael Chen, age 19, had asked Margaret to attend a school dance just weeks before her murder, and her polite rejection had embarrassed him in front of his friends. Several classmates reported Chen making angry comments about Margaret, thinking she was too good for everyone. Chen's alibi proved more problematic. He claimed to have been studying alone in his bedroom, with only his mother's testimony supporting his story. However, extensive investigation revealed no physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene, and his emotional reactions during questioning seemed genuine rather than calculated. Father Patrick Murphy himself became a reluctant suspect when investigators learned about heated discussions he had engaged in with Margaret regarding her volunteer work with unwed mothers. Some parishioners had criticized Margaret's compassion toward fallen women, and Father Murphy had defended her publicly, creating tension within the congregation. The priest's alibi was ironclad. He had been conducting evening mass until 9:30 p.m., followed by a parish council meeting that lasted until nearly midnight, with dozens of witnesses confirming his whereabouts. By spring 1966, the Margaret O'Connor investigation had exhausted all promising leads and consumed thousands of police hours without producing an arrest. The Cleveland Police Department faced mounting pressure to solve other cases, including a series of armed robberies and 2 additional homicides that occurred during the winter months. Detective Walsh made his final official report on the O'Connor case in June 1966, noting that all physical evidence had been thoroughly examined and all persons of interest had been cleared or eliminated through investigation. The case file was transferred to the Cold Case Division, joining hundreds of other unsolved crimes in the basement of Cleveland Police Headquarters. What time is it where you're watching this? And can you imagine 50 years passing without answers? The O'Connor family's suffering extended far beyond Margaret's death, reshaping every aspect of their daily existence for decades to come. Thomas Patrick O'Connor, Margaret's father, transformed from a gregarious steelworker who enjoyed neighborhood barbecues and Friday night bowling into a haunted man who worked overtime shifts to avoid returning to a house filled with memories. Dad never fully recovered, Kevin O'Connor recalled in a 2010 interview. He would sit in Margaret's bedroom for hours, just staring at her awards on the wall, and Mom would have to bring his dinner up on a tray. Thomas developed severe insomnia and began drinking heavily, ultimately losing his supervisor position at Republic Steel in 1968, when his alcohol problem affected his work performance. Catherine Marie O'Connor channeled her grief into fierce advocacy, writing hundreds of letters to police officials, newspaper editors, and political representatives demanding justice for her daughter. She established a small memorial fund at St. Bartholomew Church and organized annual prayer services on the anniversary of Margaret's death, events that drew smaller crowds each year as the community's attention moved to more recent tragedies. Mom became obsessed with keeping Margaret's memory alive, Daniel O'Connor explained decades later. She couldn't bear the thought that people might forget, so she made it her life's mission to remind everyone. Catherine converted Margaret's bedroom into a shrine, preserving everything exactly as it had been on November 23, 1965. School books stacked on the desk, choir music on the dresser, and the dress Margaret had planned to wear to Thanksgiving dinner hanging in the closet. Kevin O'Connor, age 14 when his sister died, struggled through high school and eventually enlisted in the Army to escape Cleveland's painful memories. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, using combat as a way to process his family's trauma, and didn't return home until 1971. Daniel, the youngest brother at age 11, grew up in the shadow of his sister's murder, developing anxiety and depression that required years of therapy. The extended O'Connor family gradually distanced themselves from Thomas and Catherine, finding their grief too overwhelming and their quest for justice too consuming to maintain normal relationships. The Cleveland Police Department reviewed the Margaret O'Connor case multiple times over the ensuing decades, each examination reflecting advances in forensic science and investigative techniques. In 1975, Detective Lieutenant Patricia Hayes ordered a comprehensive review of all physical evidence, hoping that new fingerprint analysis methods might reveal previously undetected clues. The examination produced no new leads, but Hayes noted several pieces of evidence that had deteriorated significantly due to improper storage conditions in the police department's basement evidence room. In 1983, the introduction of improved ballistics analysis prompted another review, though investigators found no firearms evidence connected to Margaret's case. The 1990s brought DNA analysis capabilities to Cleveland police, and in 1994, Detective Sergeant Michael Torres authorized testing of biological evidence recovered from Margaret's clothing and the crime scene. Unfortunately, DNA samples had degraded beyond useful analysis, a common problem with evidence stored for nearly 3 decades. The year 2005 marked a significant effort when newly appointed cold case detective Lisa Rodriguez received funding to digitize old case files and re-examine evidence using modern forensic techniques. Rodriguez discovered that several pieces of physical evidence had been mislabeled or lost during multiple relocations of the evidence storage facility, hampering any meaningful scientific analysis. Cam's Corners evolved dramatically during the 50 years following Margaret's murder, transitioning from a close-knit Catholic neighborhood to a diverse community with significant demographic and economic changes. The parish school where Margaret had been a student closed in 1998 due to declining enrollment, and St. Bartholomew Church merged with two other parishes in 2003. Many of the single-family homes were converted to apartments or demolished to make way for commercial development, erasing physical reminders of the community that had existed during Margaret's lifetime. What's the weather like where you are right now? Can you feel the seasons changing like the decades that passed without justice for Margaret? March 15, 2015, began routinely for cold case detective Maria Santos as she reviewed laboratory reports that had arrived over the weekend. Among the routine paperwork was a notification from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation regarding a DNA match that had been generated through the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. The match connected biological evidence from Margaret O'Connor's 1965 murder to a sample collected during a 2014 arrest for driving under the influence. Santos initially assumed the notification was an error. 50-year-old evidence rarely yielded viable DNA profiles, and the suspect identified seemed completely unlikely. However, careful verification confirmed that sophisticated new extraction techniques had successfully isolated DNA from a fabric sample that had been preserved in a sealed evidence envelope since 1965. Forensic scientists at the Ohio BCI laboratory had employed advanced techniques including mitochondrial DNA analysis and STR, short tandem repeat, profiling to extract genetic material from degraded samples. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the laboratory's senior DNA analyst, explained that new chemical processes could isolate DNA from samples previously considered too deteriorated for analysis. We can now extract viable genetic profiles from evidence that would have been useless just 10 years ago, Dr. Walsh noted in her report. The process involves using specialized enzymes to break down proteins that bind to DNA molecules, followed by amplification techniques that can generate readable profiles from incredibly small genetic samples. Statistical analysis indicated that the probability of the DNA match being coincidental was less than 1 in several billion, making it virtually certain that the evidence had come from the identified suspect. The DNA match identified Brother Thomas Patrick Brennan, age 72, a member of the Society of Jesus who had taught English and Latin at St. Ignatius High School for 47 years. In 1965, when Margaret O'Connor was murdered, Brennan had been a 22-year-old seminary student completing his teaching practicum at St. Bartholomew High School. He had never been considered a suspect because seminary students were viewed as above suspicion, and his supervisors had provided glowing character references during the initial investigation. Detective Santos discovered that Brennan had maintained an impeccable reputation throughout his career, receiving numerous teaching awards and serving on diocesan committees that addressed educational policy and youth ministry. Click like if this story is keeping you engaged. The shocking details we're about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about this case. For 5 decades, Brother Brennan had constructed a masterful facade of scholarly dedication and spiritual commitment while harboring the darkest of secrets. School records revealed that he had volunteered to coordinate memorial services for Margaret O'Connor in 1966, delivering a eulogy that moved congregation members to tears with its eloquent tribute to her pure soul and charitable heart. In 1970, he organized a scholarship fund in Margaret's name, personally raising over $15,000 through bake sales, car washes, and donation drives. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Brennan maintained contact with Catherine O'Connor, sending sympathy cards on the anniversary of Margaret's death and occasionally visiting her home to share memories of her daughter's academic achievements. Brother Brennan was so kind to us over the years, Kevin O'Connor remembered. He would call Mom on Margaret's birthday and tell her how proud Margaret would have been of the scholarship recipients. It gave her so much comfort. The psychological manipulation was breathtakingly cruel. Brennan had inserted himself into the family's grieving process, positioning himself as a source of spiritual guidance, while knowing he was responsible for their suffering. Forensic psychologist Dr. Amanda Rivera analyzed Brennan's behavior patterns, and identified classic characteristics of psychopathic personality disorder, including superficial charm, manipulation of others for personal gratification, and complete absence of empathy or remorse. Brother Brennan demonstrated textbook narcissistic behavior by inserting himself into the victim's memorialization, Dr. Rivera explained. This allowed him to relive his crime while appearing compassionate and maintaining his position of trust within the community. School administrators had trusted Brennan with vulnerable students for decades, never suspecting that their respected colleague was capable of violence. His personnel file contained dozens of commendations from parents, students, and fellow educators who praised his dedication to academic excellence and spiritual development. On March 16, 2015, at 6:47 a.m., Detective Santos and 4 uniformed officers executed an arrest warrant at St. Ignatius High School, where Brother Brennan was preparing for his first period Latin class. Students watched in confusion as police led their beloved teacher away in handcuffs, his hands visibly shaking as officers placed him in the patrol car. Brennan's first words to Detective Santos were, "I've been waiting 50 years for this day to come." A search of Brennan's modest apartment in the school's faculty residence revealed a disturbing collection of newspaper clippings about Margaret's case, including articles about memorial services and family interviews that he had carefully preserved in a scrapbook. Hidden behind a false wall in his bedroom closet, investigators discovered Margaret's silver cross necklace, the one her grandmother had given her for confirmation, along with a detailed journal chronicling his guilt and fear over the decades. The Cam's Corners community struggled to process the revelation that a respected religious educator had committed the crime that had haunted their neighborhood for half a century. "I can't believe Brother Brennan could hurt anyone," said Maria Lopez, whose 3 children had been his students. "He helped my daughter with college applications and wrote recommendation letters. How could someone who seemed so caring be capable of such evil?" Neighbor Eleanor Morrison, now 86 and the same woman who had employed Margaret as a babysitter, expressed disbelief and betrayal. "He attended memorial services and told us he was praying for Margaret's soul. The hypocrisy is just overwhelming." What theories do you have about how someone could maintain such a deception for so long? The trial of Brother Thomas Patrick Brennan began on October 12, 2015, in Cuyahoga County Court before Judge Patricia Williams. Prosecutor James Mitchell presented DNA evidence, journal entries, and testimony from forensic experts who explained how advanced techniques had solved the 50-year-old case. Brennan's defense attorney, Michael Rodriguez, argued that his client's age and decades of community service warranted consideration, but offered no substantive challenge to the overwhelming scientific evidence. The most powerful testimony came from Kevin O'Connor, now 64, who addressed Brennan directly. "You watched our family suffer for 50 years, and you pretended to care about our pain while knowing you were responsible for destroying our lives." Brother Brennan showed no emotion during victim impact statements, staring straight ahead as Margaret's surviving family members described decades of anguish and unanswered questions. On November 15, 2015, exactly 50 years and 8 days after Margaret's murder, Judge Williams sentenced Brennan to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, stating, "Your crimes extend far beyond the murder itself. You compounded the victim's family's suffering through decades of calculated deception and manipulation." Margaret O'Connor's case prompted significant changes in how religious institutions conduct background checks and monitor personnel who work with young people. The Cleveland Diocese implemented new policies requiring psychological evaluations and comprehensive criminal background investigations for all employees and volunteers. The case has been studied in criminal justice programs as an example of how advances in forensic science can solve decades-old crimes, and Detective Santos has presented the investigation's methodology at law enforcement conferences across Ohio. The Margaret O'Connor Memorial Scholarship continues to support young women pursuing social work degrees, fulfilling the dreams that were stolen from her 50 years ago. If this case fascinates you, subscribe to see our deep dives into similar cold cases that were solved through modern forensic techniques. Share this story with others who appreciate thorough investigations that reveal truth despite the passage of time. What other unsolved cases from your area do you think might benefit from modern DNA analysis? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and remember that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it just requires patience, persistence, and scientific advancement to finally reveal the truth.